So first off, I just want to say thank you very, very much, all of you, for joining me today. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. And it's a topic that we are exploring constantly at United We Own, and that is, what is trauma? So my journey began here. My name is Matt, and I'm one of the co-founders, along with my wife, Jenny. And when I started this whole process, I really didn't know why I was doing United We Own. I thought to myself, I'm trying to spend more time with my wife. I'm looking to find a better purpose in my life, or something that's a little bit bigger and better. And it was when I picked up this book, The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, that my life really changed. He talked about his love and passion for trauma. And then one day, one of his colleagues said to him, yes, all right, beautiful, Andrea, good. One of his colleagues said to him, you know, Bessel, you seem to like trauma stories so well. Why don't you go down to the bar, and for $5, you can buy anyone a beer, and you can hear more about trauma stories. And then that's when he realized that this really wasn't about the research, that what he was really doing was me search. And that's when it just, light bulb after light bulb went off in my head. And I said to myself, wow, I'm not researching trauma at all. What I'm doing is I'm researching about who I am. So today, we will talk about what is trauma. How do you define what trauma is? What are the different types of traumas? We'll talk about some of the categories of those traumas. And then, of course, how does trauma play out, right? How does it affect your mind, your body, your social engagement systems? And then we'll talk briefly at the end, and also a little bit throughout, about some practices that we can use to start exploring some of your own traumas, and then serving those who you're working with in whatever capacity that might be, as a yoga teacher, regular teacher, nurse, whatever that is. So a couple of books that we'll be referencing, like I said, The Man, the Myth, the Legend, Bessel van der Kolk. This is an unbelievable book. And if you're in the mood for a good month-long cry, this is the book to read. It's just life-changing. Dr. van der Kolk has done a lot of work with David Emerson, and they work together at the Institute of Trauma. And this book, Overcoming Trauma Through Yoga, deeply impacted me and my own personal journey through my own traumas. A lot of the sort of scientific stuff comes from this, and this is the Pocket Guide to the Polyvagal Theory by a man named Dr. Stephen Porges. If you're looking for an understanding of how trauma impacts your nervous system, and how your nervous system is conveyed to all the other humans through your social engagement systems, and how trauma impacts that, this is the book for you. It's a wonderful book. It's 100 pages, very conversational. It's a quick read. And last but not least, I don't have the physical copy of the book with me, but I wanted you to see the cover so you could find it later, and that's called Trauma and Recovery. And this is by Dr. Judith Herman, who has also done a lot of work with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. I found the Trauma and Recovery book to be a really particularly moving one, because it is written from a feminist perspective. And as a man, I gained a ton of insight about sort of the feminist experience of trauma, and trauma from a female perspective. And I found it to be unbelievably helpful to me in sort of my own process. So this first question is more of a thought experiment, but go along with me for a bit about it, because it will start to really open up some things as far as like, how do we deal with trauma? And this is a real question, so please pop some answers for me into the chat. And this is the question: what is a mango? And I mean that literally, so I'll get us started with something that I think we can probably all agree on, and that is that a mango is a fruit. Does anyone, all right, great. Julia throws in, it's a sweet fruit. All right, so we throw the sweet over here in this category. We'll call this sort of the positive aspects of a mango. It's a tropical fruit. Yes, Randy, it is a juicy, sweet, tropical fruit. Fabulous, good. Now, from my own perspective, I would say that it's a sour fruit. I would not call a mango sweet. I would refer to it not as a juicy, but perhaps as a mealy fruit, or a pasty fruit. When I put mango in my mouth, my whole face goes like this, and I don't enjoy it at all. Does anybody else have any sort of thoughts about what a mango is to them? I see tropical fruit. I see that it's orange. Orange is probably a little broad, right? There's some yellow in there, and there's some pinks, and there's many different layers to the surface of what a mango is, right? Difficult to peel? Yes. Gross. Jenna and I are in agreement. Mangoes are gross. Foreign fruit can cause irritation to the skin. So we have this wide range, right? This huge spectrum of what a mango is. Is a mango a juicy tropical fruit that's sweet and delicious? Or is a mango a sour, pasty, mealy, gross fruit? And the answer, of course, is that it is both, right? It is a subjective experience. The mango is both a sweet, delicious, juicy fruit, and at the same time, it is also a disgusting, mealy, sour, pasty fruit. And it is also simultaneously neither one of those things, because the mango does not exist outside of your subjective experience and relationship with that mango. And that's what trauma is. Trauma is not a specific event, but it is your response to that event that determines whether or not an event is traumatic. It's why two people can experience essentially the same event and have entirely different outcomes, because whether or not something is traumatic is subjective. And there is a wide spectrum of experience that determines whether or not something is in fact traumatic. So does that make sense as a concept? Do we get the idea that the mango doesn't really exist as anything outside of your relationship to that mango? And trauma is the same thing. And the reason it's so important that we think about it in that way is because a lot of times in trauma work, you'll see comparisons of trauma. And we want to push that out of the way sort of right away. I've heard before the phrase, and it's pretty common in the world of trauma work, you call that trauma? Your trauma is my Tuesday, inferring that what you're experiencing is not trauma, because what I have experienced is on such a deep and profound level that what you call trauma, I call a day of the week. Or the sort of inverse of that, which is that perhaps your trauma isn't enough for you to be, quote unquote, at the table here, right? I wasn't raped, I was sexually assaulted, and so my trauma is not as great as yours. And what we're going to talk about and unpack a little bit today is that not only is that unhelpful because trauma is a subjective experience, but the survivor of trauma, their response to that traumatic event was completely unconscious and was outside of their realm of like their thinking brain making choices during a moment. All right, so we're going to just kind of move that one out of the way. And if we can't define what is a mango, because a mango is anything, and we can't define what trauma is because it's not an event, but the response to the event, then what we can look for is some common characteristics of a traumatic event. And those break down into basically three things. And they are that the event was unexpected. It came out of the blue. You had no idea this was coming. And because the event was unexpected, you were unprepared. You didn't anticipate this, you were unprepared for the moment, and so the outcome of the event felt unstoppable. Unexpected, unprepared, unstoppable. And that event simultaneously was filled with feelings of horror, extreme terror, fear, combined with profound feelings of helplessness, which we'll come back to, and feelings of annihilation. And some of the deeper impacts of a traumatic event generally happen when the survivor feels they couldn't escape, they were physically restrained or trapped, or they were exposed to the traumatic stimuli to the point of exhaustion. Those are sort of common characteristics about what a traumatic event looks like. But the event, of course, and we'll go back to this again and again, is irrelevant. It's a subjective experience. You've noticed a few times that I haven't said the word victim. I'm specifically choosing the word survivor, because someone who has had a traumatic experience, yes, indeed, someone who has had a traumatic experience, the words matter. So I'm going to read to you very quickly what the definition of survivor is, and then what the definition of victim is. And I hope that just the definition will allow you to understand the importance of our word choice. The definition of a survivor: a person who remains alive after an event in which others have died. A person who copes well with difficulties in their lives. That's the definition of a survivor. The definition of a victim is a person who is harmed, injured, or killed as a result of a crime, accident, or event. A person who was tricked or duped. As somebody who is a survivor of trauma myself, these are things that I feel like they're things that we should just sort of get out of the way before we even begin to share. So I'll tell you a little bit about who I am. I experienced some traumas when I was younger. Those played out over my life in a whole series of events and things and choices and behaviors that I wouldn't want to recreate. But to be completely honest with you, I had no idea that the experiences that I had had were in any way impacting me until I started to do some of this work, until I started to sort of dive down a little deeper. And then it hit me like a flood. And suddenly I realized that this was the work that I indeed needed to do and needed to really dive into in a real serious way. So that's my story. That's who I am. There's no need to go into any war stories or anything like that, because of course, as we said, there's no need to compare traumas and sort of rank them, because the event is completely subjective. As we can see, we're not alone, right? As survivors, there are many, many, many survivors. The term post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, was first entered into the medical literature in 1984. And in that definition, it said that it was considered to be for behaviors that were outside of the range of normal human experience. And just from the people who are a part of this call, you can see that that's most surely not an accurate definition of what trauma is. According to the National Council on Trauma, 70% of adults admit to having experienced a traumatic experience in their lives. And something interesting to note about that is that most people, when they're asked about difficult experiences in their lives, they lie and they downplay it. So that 70% number is in fact probably much higher. 30% of adults, according to the National Council on Trauma, have experienced at least 4 or more traumatic events. And if you do a little bit of math, that's about 225 million people that have experienced trauma and report experiencing trauma, unlike me, who experienced trauma but wasn't even really aware or allowing himself to be aware of it. And about 90 million people have experienced a traumatic event 4 or more times. And somewhere between 8 and 10% of the American population is living with post-traumatic stress disorder. So what are the types of traumatic exposure? There are lots of different types, but we're going to focus on just a couple for today. The first is an acute trauma, and this is a single incident of trauma. A lot of times this will be a car accident, an unexpected death, something of that nature. The next step is chronic trauma, that is repeated or prolonged traumas. Domestic violence falls under this category, sexual abuse, things that are ongoing. And then there's complex trauma. And this is varied and multiple traumatic events that are usually invasive to the person, and they're often interpersonal, meaning that you know the person who was involved in creating that traumatic moment in your life. An example of complex trauma is one that's talked about pretty regularly, and that's childhood trauma. And childhood trauma is so detrimental because of the rapidly developing human brain. So childhood trauma occurs between the ages of 0 and 6, and it has a far more profound effect. And just as an example, children who are sexually assaulted, 90% of them will develop post-traumatic stress disorder. Whereas adult women who are sexually assaulted, less than 50% will experience post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's almost a doubling with childhood trauma. And the last form of trauma we'll touch on briefly is one that everybody has sort of touched on a little bit today, and that is cultural trauma. The community of the people of color have most definitely experienced a cultural trauma. And this is a trauma that is passed down intergenerationally. And the way that it's passed down often is from mother to child and the parents or the closest people to that child and their nervous system. So if I'm experiencing chronic stress or I'm experiencing trauma on a regular basis, my nervous system, as we'll talk about more in just a minute, is constantly at a heightened state of arousal. And the way our nervous systems work is that we are always looking to the other nervous systems of the people around us to let us know whether we are safe or we are in danger. And evolutionarily, this makes a lot of sense, right? So I'm moving around through the forest, and if I'm not picking up on the fact that the other people in my tribe are concerned about something, I'm probably the one who's going to get eaten by the tiger. So we have learned living in tribes and evolving in tribes to look around us to let us know whether we're safe or not. And since most children are developing in a non-verbal capacity, initially they are interpreting it only on what they're feeling. And what they're feeling from the parents and those who are around them and loving them is, this is not a safe place. We do not live in a safe environment, and you need to behave and act accordingly. And children pick that up, and it goes on and on for generations and generations. And so we are collectively experiencing that right now with COVID-19, as well as the systemic racism that we see in our society. Do we have any questions before we dive in about sort of trauma in general? And then we'll go into what are common experiences of a traumatic event. We're feeling good? Okay, great. The most common things that occur during a traumatic event are profound changes in your autonomic nervous system, in your psychological and physiological arousal, in your cognition, and in your memory. And the reason there is such profound changes is that the traumatic experience is an experience where your body thinks it is going to die. And when you think you're going to die, there is no decision that is off limits, because the only goal of the organism is to survive. And so what happens is that the systems become overwhelmed. As you are attempting to escape either physically, mentally, emotionally, or all three, your perceptions become inaccurate. Timelines are skewed. There's often a sense of slowing down as if life is moving in slow motion. Your judgments fail. Sense organs fail. So sight, sound, hearing, taste, touch, or they become heightened. And we'll talk a little bit more about how these, when that traumatic moment happens, how that is sort of locked into the memory. The key takeaway with no matter how your body chose to react to that traumatic event is that your body did the right thing because you're alive and you're sitting here today. Our body has two main strategies of defense when it encounters a life-threatening stimulus. And the first is the one that you're probably most familiar with, and that is our sympathetic nervous system response, or commonly referred to as fight or flight. Fight or flight is set off by an intense level of anger or fear. It causes a huge surge of adrenaline in your body. All of the pain-fighting chemicals, endorphins, neuroepinephrine, all of these kick off. And so your body is able to tolerate immense amounts of pain. Your heart rate goes up, the amount of oxygen in your blood goes up, and all of the blood is pushed out of the organs and out to the hands and the feet so that you can protect yourself, you can fight, or you can flee. What happens during a traumatic event is that the window of tolerance for that sympathetic nervous system shrinks considerably. And what your window of tolerance is your ability to react with quote unquote normal emotions, normal behaviors to a stimuli. And that window of what stimuli you are able to tolerate shrinks dramatically with people who have experienced trauma. The second strategy to survive is the dorsal vagal response, or the ancient parasympathetic nervous system. And Randy mentioned earlier that I've done another workshop on the ancient nervous system, so I won't tap into it too much. But if you want to learn about one of the most ancient defense strategies of vertebrates, go ahead and check that one out. But what this one is, just for our purposes today, is the freeze or the feigned death. So it's the same thing. You're faced with this life-threatening situation, and after your body has attempted to fight it off, fight or flight, it does an equivalent to pulling the emergency brake. So it pulls that emergency brake The adrenaline flies through the roof, but what happens is as an inverse to the sympathetic response, what happens is that your heart rate plummets and your breath rate goes to zero, and the amount of oxygen inside of your body depletes rapidly. And so what you experience is an out-of-body experience. It's a feeling like your conscious mind is leaving you. There's a feeling of numbness because you are overwhelming your body's pain receptors, both physically and emotionally. And again, when this kicks in, that window of tolerance shrinks, and your baseline for what you're able to handle from that point forward is forever changed. Once you've experienced that traumatic event, generally trauma survivors will return to the same state of their autonomic nervous system that they used in order to save your life. Why wouldn't you, right? It worked the first time. So if I survived by shutting down, anytime I experience a new stimuli, I will go to revert to that shutting down. But the problem is because the window of tolerance shrinks, I react to stimuli with a more extreme reaction. And so what was extremely adaptive and allowed me to survive in the moment becomes maladaptive in my safe present moment. So my nervous system has been reconditioned. It's now at a heightened state of arousal constantly, and it has an extreme reaction to specific stimuli that's related to the event. And that goes back to the treminders, and we'll touch on that a little bit more. The main takeaway here about the change in the nervous system is that it is extensive. It is covering all aspects of the body, from your gut to the way your lungs breathe, the bacteria, how it's moving through your body. And not only is it extensive, but it is enduring. In addition to the physiological response of the autonomic nervous system forever changing and forever raising its arousal level, trust in the world has been rocked for the trauma survivor. You had a relationship with that mango, right? You had an experience of it as one thing, and then suddenly it's rocked. It's completely changed. And that mango no longer is that sweet, juicy fruit, but now it has in fact become an entirely different thing. The mango hasn't changed, but your experience and trust in that mango, in that sense of the world, has changed. And so needless to say, once your trust in the world has been violated, your interaction with the world is forever changed. Because if you can't trust something, you're not going to react in the same way. If you've always pet your dog and it loves you and it's been sweet, and then one day it turns and bites you, it's going to change the way that you interact with that animal forever. Of the 70% of us who, according to the National Institute of Trauma, have experienced trauma, 20% will go on to develop the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Going back to the appropriate languaging, generally when I am speaking to somebody who might be experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, we take the D off because it's not a disorder. These are symptoms that you're experiencing as a result of a traumatic event. So I prefer, and will continue for the rest of this workshop, to refer to it as post-traumatic stress, or PTS. There are countless symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and they manifest in different ways for everybody, but they traditionally fall into 3 categories. And those categories are hyperarousal, intrusion, and constriction. And we'll start with the first one because it's the order in which trauma survivors generally experience them. The first state is hyperarousal. And this, of course, is a persistent expectation of danger. And it makes a lot of sense why this would be one of the first symptoms that you would experience, because you're trying to prevent yourself from experiencing any more harm. This is a result of the chronic arousal of your sympathetic nervous system. And what's happening is that our sympathetic nervous system is actually constantly in go mode. And it makes sense on an evolutionary level. We don't want to have to turn it on, right? If we see a stimuli that's dangerous, we want to instantly be able to react with fight or flight. And there's something called your vagal brake. It's your vagus nerve. It's the nerve that's most in charge of, that it coordinates the parasympathetic nervous system. And that vagal brake acts to slow down the sympathetic nervous system. But what's happening is, in this case, is that vagal brake has been tamped down significantly. And so you are constantly experiencing that hyperarousal. Think about that moment right before you step on stage and how your body is going and you've got the butterflies in the belly. You can probably sense a difference between how I was behaving at the beginning of this workshop call and how I'm behaving now once I got a chance to kind of co-regulate a little bit with you guys. And that's a result of sort of my own traumas and hyperarousal that I experience. People who are in a state of hyperarousal, they startle easily, both to sounds, but especially to touch, which is really important for those of you who are teaching yoga. Touch should always be consent, and at United We Own, we don't allow touching because people who have experienced trauma, touch is extremely treminding. There's lots of reminders with touch. People who are in a state of hyperarousal tend to sleep poorly, both having trouble falling asleep and also staying asleep. They are vigilant to dangers, both real and imaginary. So to somebody who is in a state of hyperarousal, to you, that is a mango. And to them, that is a source of danger. So it's both real and imaginary. And needless to say, they are quick to anger and quick to rage, which are outside of the sort of traditional emotional reactions. To calm sort of my own hyperarousal, I'm going to offer a breath if anyone would like to join me, which can be really helpful if you're experiencing a state of hyperarousal. The upper lobes of our lungs are most connected to our sympathetic nervous system, which makes a lot of sense, right? You're breathing, we're fight or flight. Those short, shallow breaths. I got to get oxygen into the system as quickly as possible. The lower lobes of the lungs are actually most connected to the parasympathetic nervous system. And so when you are able to take a deeper breath down into the lower lobes of the lungs, you're telling your body, a little hack from your lungs, that your body is safe and you do not need to be in a state of sympathetic response. Also, when you take that deep breath, your diaphragm goes down, widens out, and that squeezes on that vagus nerve, that vagal brake, and it kind of tamps down the sympathetic nervous system. So we're going to try a breath right now. I invite you to take a breath with me, and we're going to do two things. We're going to breathe down and do a little bit of the belly breathing. But then our goal is going to be to elongate our exhale longer than the inhale. And we'll touch on that right after we do a few rounds of it. So right where you are, there's no need to close your eyes. If that's something that helps you to go inside and something you enjoy, by all means. But in terms of working with people who have experienced trauma, always offer that as a consent choice, because sometimes closing your eyes can right there be a reminder. So maybe placing a hand on your stomach so that you can feel the movement in and out, and finding a place to just pause and gaze, slow down the thoughts, the world around us. Taking a breath in your own time as you're ready, and trying to take the breath and deepen it a little bit deeper than perhaps you might would normally. And then as you exhale, see if you can elongate your exhale for a few counts longer than your inhale. And let's go ahead and we'll do that together 5 times. Maybe there's the opportunity to bring some awareness to the back body. About 70% of our lungs are in the back. See if you can feel the 360-degree expansion of the belly. And then whenever you're ready, we'll just let that next one go and let that fall away. And maybe just take a moment to briefly notice how you're feeling. I'm feeling a sense of ease and a sense of calm that I wasn't feeling just a few moments before. Talking about hyper arousal sometimes makes me a little hyper aroused. So when you elongate that exhale, it's a little bit of a trick. It's a little bit of a hack to your brain because you are telling your brain, we're okay. We can relax and we can take it all down a notch. So that's hyper arousal. That's the first state. The next state is intrusion. When you experience a traumatic event, it leaves an indelible imprint in your mind, body, and people often say in the spirit of the person. And what intrusion is, it is a reliving of that event in the present moment, as if it is happening right now. And generally, those are accompanied by feelings of anger and fear. Trauma is not formed as a traditional memory. When something bad happens, that's not a trauma, but a bad incident, you will form a memory that is verbal and has a linear time frame, and then you'll incorporate it into your story of yourself. So I was walking along, I was going to the store, then this guy did this, and I did that, and then I was like, what? This is ridiculous. And I was so angry. So I have this story, no matter what that incident was, no matter how bad it was, it's verbal, and I'm able to create a storyline. I'm able to incorporate it into who Matt is. But traumatic memories are not recorded in that same way. They are encoded in a way that is similar to a child's memory, especially children who are operating on implicit memory pre-verbal. Traumatic memories are non-verbal. They are encoded with emotion and they are interactive. So much the same way that a child is able to imagine and interact with memories and the world around, people who have experienced traumatic memories will often interact with them and sort of relive the experience in a way where they're trying to change the outcome or be in control of that moment. These encodings, these memories, include vivid sensations, images fragmented, not in context, which are tied directly to powerful emotions, most notably fear and helplessness. They can occur during the daytime. Those are called flashbacks. And they can occur at nighttime, traumatic nighttime nightmares or terrors. An interesting little side note about nighttime nighttime nightmares is that they don't occur during the usual time when people dream during REM sleep. They occur in unusual dream states, non-REM. So the reason that this is happening, so that's sort of the background of how the memory is encoded, but the experience of a trauminder is happening in the present for two main reasons. And the first is an area of the brain called Brodmann Area 19. It's a portion of your cerebral cortex that is involved in the real-time processing of the world around you. So visually, obviously as humans, the world around us, that's the way we take it in the most, right? And what this is doing is every single thing that you're looking at, your Brodmann Area 19 is taking it into your brain and is shooting it out in real time to all the other areas of your brain so that they can make sense of the world that you're experiencing and move through it with you. What happens is when you look at a trauminder on a CAT scan, the Brodmann Area 19 goes haywire. It absolutely fires off, and it looks as though that person is experiencing that trauma on the CAT scan like they are experiencing it in real time. A way to understand this, if you've never had a traumatic flashback, is to think about a time maybe you were driving, like a long distance, you're on the highway, you're on the freeway, it's a long road, and some thoughts start coming into your head. And those thoughts are tied to some pretty strong emotions. And all of a sudden you start thinking about what that guy did, what this, and then you kind of come to and you're 10 miles down the road. And this is a curvy road and you have no memory of driving it. You were living through the experience. You were changing lanes. You were staying at speed, and yet you have no memory of it. So you're interacting with the world, but inside your mind, you are living in present time with a traumatic experience. So simultaneously with this Brodmann Area 19 going off, going haywire, your Broca or Broca's area, B-R-O-C-A-S, shuts down. And the Broca's area is the part of your brain that controls language, grammar, and syntax. So while it does control the little mouth noises that I am making, what it really controls is the way your brain is able to put it in a way that makes sense, right? So they're not just little pops and buzzes. You can create sentence structure. You put the noun in the right place and the verb, and you're able to make sense out of what I'm saying. But when that shuts down, you are not only experiencing a trauma in real time, but you cannot convey how you're feeling to the other humans who are around you. A way to understand this is if you've ever had a moment where you became enraged, you were so angry at somebody, and you were going to go in there and you were going to tell them about this and how they did this and what about that. And all that comes out of your mouth is some version of like, get out. And the reason that is that when your sympathetic nervous system engaged, your Broca's area shut down and you went to one word monosyllabic statements. So now you're experiencing this in real time. You cannot convey to the other people how you're feeling, and you actually can't understand what they are trying to convey to you. So needless to say, it is a very isolating experience. I'd like to offer now a breath that perhaps you can use if you're having a moment of intrusion, which is taking you out of the present moment, by offering something that brings you back into the present moment. When I'm having something that's really going crazy and I can't seem to bring myself back, I will bring my attention to my big toe. And I will start to experience where my big toe is right now. So I invite you to give that a try. See what happens if you bring your attention to your big toe, but let the rest of the world continue to go on. Maybe experience it as a 360-degree object. Is it inside of a shoe? Is it connected to the ground? Let that expand out to the foot. What's its relationship to the other toes? What's the ball of the feet? What's the heel doing? All of these little things are bringing us back into the present moment right now, experiencing the experience of what our toe is, and it's taking us out of that moment. The second offering I'll offer while you're thinking about your big toe is counting of the breath. When you count the breath, your mind is focused on the numbers, and it is less apt to go off on the tangents of the treminder. So taking a moment where you are now, I'm going to breathe in for a count of 3, and I'm going to breathe out for a count of 5. So doing a little bit of the double duty, getting the hyperarousal, lengthening out the exhale, but focusing only on the counting. So I'll do 2 rounds, then 3 rounds on your own, and then we'll just take a moment to sort of notice where your mind was when you were focusing on the counting. If something pops into the head, let it go like the passing cloud and come back to the counting. So just finding a place that you feel comfortable, and we'll inhale for 1, 2, 3. Exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale, 1, 2, 3. Exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Continuing on your own, focusing on the counting, the numbers. And we'll let that go whenever you're ready. And then bring your attention one more time back down to your big toe while you think about your experience of the counting. Where did your brain go? Was there a point of focus? And then how did that feel? So just take 30 seconds for yourself. No right or wrong answer, just so that you experience that moment. So we had hyperarousal and we had intrusion. And the last is constriction. And Miss Judith Herman refers to this as the numbing response of surrender. And I think that is just so beautiful. What constriction is an attempt to constrict your own field of consciousness, trying to keep the traumatic memories and the feelings associated with them out of your mind. Constriction is usually a response when the dorsal vagal, that ancient nervous system, the parasympathetic defense system, has been engaged. When that is pulled the emergency brake and you disassociated from your body. It is this loss of control, this feeling of helplessness, that is actually the thing that is most cited by trauma, people who've experienced trauma, as the most painful part of their trauma. And that tends to have the most profound and long-lasting effects. Generally, this ancient vagus defense system is most often engaged by children and by people who are significantly smaller than their attacker, or if they are physically restrained. And it does appear to have the longest and most detrimental impacts. People who experience constriction oftentimes have no memory of the traumatic event, but they have deeply painful memories that are connected with it. Or the inverse happens. They have a moment by moment experience and they can say to you, this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. And it's completely devoid of emotion. Constriction creates sort of a sense of detached calm. So you're not experiencing the pain or the terror that was associated with your traumatic experience. But what happens, of course, with constriction is you stop experiencing any sensations. And so from the outside, this can appear as sort of a passivity or an indifference, an emotional detachment, someone who's like a little too cool. And for me, that was one of my things. I didn't really feel emotion. I didn't feel negative or positive. I didn't feel. People who experience constriction will report things like, my life doesn't feel real to me anymore. I feel like I'm living someone else's life, or this is a dream, or I'm in a trance. Time is often altered, and there's a feeling that time has gone into slow motion, like you're living in somebody's movie. People who experience constriction don't experience emotional pain, but as an interesting side note, they actually have an extremely high tolerance for physical pain as well, because the body's receptors for pain are so constricted and so shut down. One last little sort of fun fact, people who experience the constriction are often the people who are most likely to abuse drugs and alcohol. And I can really attest to this. I used to love to drink tequila and get into mosh pits because I felt things. I felt a lot of things because I didn't feel so many things on a lot of other levels. But of course, drugs and alcohol only compound the difficulty of readjusting to your traumatic experience. So that sort of gives a broad perspective of what the category of constriction is. As somebody who has experienced it personally, I can say that it's very hard to feel things for myself, to feel good, to feel bad, to love. But it is easier to love someone else. I am more easily able to give love to a dog than to myself. And so I'm going to offer two things. And one is a meta meditation, which we've all done before. May I be happy, may I be safe. Some variation on that. But instead of making it about ourselves, we're going to make it about others. Because for most people who are experiencing constriction, they can feel for others, but they can't feel for themselves. So we'll just take a brief moment and think of somebody else who you would like to send some love or compassion. And since everyone else is on mute, I'll just go ahead and I'll say it. May you be happy. May you feel free. May you feel happy. May you feel free. May you feel happy. May you feel free. And I'm not sure how you're all feeling, but I am feeling better in that moment, in that sense of giving and connection with that other person. I'm taking myself out of my lack of feeling by sending you the very feelings that I am wishing to receive. And it kind of goes back to that cliche, it is better to give than to receive. One other offering I'll offer for people who are experiencing symptoms of constriction that I have found incredible use for is the idea of ho'oponopono. Ho'oponopono. Does anyone have any reference to this? It is a Hawaiian version of healing that was really brought into the medical literature by a guy named, I'm going to butcher this, Dr. Ihaleikala Hugh Len. And he was a man who was working with people who were in severe mental patients. Yes, Susan, beautiful. It is a beautiful practice. And it's an ancient healing in Hawaii where you offer 4 statements. I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. And thank you. And then there is a new guy, his name, he's not new, but he has re-envisioned Ho'oponopono. And that his name is Dr. Joe Vitale, Vitale. And he has removed the 2 center statements. And he sticks to, I love you and thank you. Because that thank you acknowledges your relationship with it without having to necessarily feel sorry. That maybe is like part 2. So I invite you for just a moment, since I can't hear anybody anyway, but you'll hear me. I invite you to think of someone or something. This does not have to be someone you don't, or you have a negative, or you don't want to think about. Someone or something. And simply offer the internal monologue of, I love you. Thank you. I love you. Thank you. I love you. Thank you. And the most important aspect of Ho'oponopono is to feel those feelings. To simply say them is just words, but to feel, I love you and thank you. And I do it all the time. When I'm in a place of constriction, when I'm in a place where I am not able to feel all of the love that I want to feel, I will walk throughout my day. I see a light. I love you. Thank you. My computer. I love you. Thank you. And I do it over and over and over and over. Ho'oponopono. Yes, that is a great one. Thank you, Don. So the 3 categories, hyperarousal, intrusion, and constriction. No matter which category you're experiencing in terms of symptoms, all trauma survivors generally speak of 2 feelings, shame and helplessness. They are pervasive in the symptoms of trauma. Does anybody have any questions about hyperarousal, intrusion, or constriction symptoms? You can just raise your little hand or raise your visual hand. We're good? Feeling good? Okay, awesome. During the process of recovering from post-traumatic stress, many survivors will alternate between intrusion and constriction. And what a lot of the doctors talk about in the books is that this is an attempt for the survivor to try to find balance. But it doesn't usually play out like that. In fact, it plays out to sort of a rapid oscillation between extremes. So as an example, oftentimes people who have experienced trauma will feel deeply alone, and they will want to be alone. They don't want to be around people. They need to withdraw their senses and everything. And yet simultaneously, they feel a deep need to connect. especially with people who understand what they are going through. People who are survivors of sexual assault will sometimes have zero desire for sex. Sometimes they will have zero desire for intimacy, but will have sex with multiple unknown partners. And it's the body's way to try to reclaim what has happened and incorporate it into the story of who they are, of who you are. So as I mentioned before, hypervigilance is that first symptom. That's because this has just occurred and you're trying to prevent more harm. The second comes into the intrusive symptoms. And these are prominent most for the first 3 months to the year after the traumatic event has happened. And they will abate over time. They become less persistent. But this is where avoiding reminders is so important, because people who experience reminders during this intrusive symptom stage oftentimes have huge fallbacks and deeply move back into states of hypervigilance, re-experience these reminders, right? Next comes constrictive. These follow the intrusive symptoms for sort of obvious reasons, that people are trying to move on with their lives. And as people will say, like, that's in the past. What's in the past is in the past. And so a numbing sensation, a feeling of not feeling like I've already gotten over this, begins to happen. But what many trauma survivors report is that there's a sense of deadness, that something inside them has died. And so it's not as if they're not experiencing, it's that it's no longer there. That part of them is gone. And so whether you're experiencing hyperarousal, intrusiveness, or constriction, trauma survivors avoid these symptoms in whatever way possible. And generally what happens then is that people end up removing themselves from their lives, and they begin to restrict their lives. And the reason that they begin to restrict their lives is not only that they're feeling all of these symptoms, but that they begin to move into the world, and the people in the world unconsciously are letting them know that they are deeply unsafe. And that is because when your nervous system has been profoundly rocked, all of the social cues that you use to let all the other humans know that you're safe, that you're a person they can interact with, they go haywire. And they go off of what is sort of quote unquote normal. Your parasympathetic nervous system, I mentioned, is traveling along your vagus nerve, which is keeping everything from your sex organs and your gut, your heart, your lungs, your esophagus. It's all working in harmony. And it dead ends in your brain stem. It is your 10th cranial nerve. You have 12 cranial nerves, and those cranial nerves, 11 of which all are affecting things in your face. So you have one for the eyes, you have one for the ears, you have one for the nose, for the mouth, the lips, the throat. All of the ways that you convey to the other people, I'm okay, you can interact with me. But when that nervous system is rocked, your nervous system, every organ in your body is telling your brain, we are not okay and we are not safe. And there is 80% of the information that your body, your whole, is absorbing about your nervous system state is coming from the organs themselves. Only 20% of the nerve fibers are coming from your brain down to your organs. So when your guts, when your IBS is kicking off and saying, we're in danger, everything else is following right along with it, including all of your social engagement systems. So what you see with people who have experienced trauma is a flat face, no smile, no frown, flat, unresponsive. You see things like smiles, but no raising of the brow. The voice changes. You lose the prosody. You lose that up and down quality that lets you know that I'm asking a question or I'm making a statement. Those go away and you start to experience a monotone voice. You also lose the ability to hear the other humans. So our eardrum developed in a very specific way to hear the human voice for sort of obvious reasons. And when you experience trauma, the middle eardrum relaxes And when it relaxes, no longer are you able to hear the human voice, especially in crowds. But what you do hear is high-pitched and low-pitched frequencies. And those are the frequencies of impending danger. So no longer able to hear the human voice, but really aware of high-pitched sounds of predators in bushes and low-pitched rumbles, the sounds of approaching animals. At the same time that all of your social engagement systems are going a little haywire, as you interact with the other people on an unconscious level, those people are sensing all of that. And they are returning those same feelings right back to you. Because it's that feeling you get, like we've all been in that subway car where somebody gets in and you get that sense of like the whole car is trying to turn away because they don't want to make eye contact. We all do that on an unconscious level all the time. And so when you are experiencing these people whose nervous systems are clearly saying to your nervous system, I am not safe, your nervous system unconsciously reacts in real time to that. So these restrictions on our lives, people start to rationalize them, right? I don't like to go out. I don't like to be in large crowds. I'm a homebody, right? I like to be at home with my dog. That's my thing. And so you come up with all of these rationalizations to avoid reminders. And then, of course, these rationalizations become a cycle of restrictions. So when you're experiencing symptoms of post-traumatic stress, it causes you to experience poor social cues and to feel isolated, which causes you not to want to go out. But when you do go out, everyone around you is saying to you, yeah, you're a little strange. What's going on with you? I don't know. I'm a little nervous. And so you choose not to go out. So you become more isolated. You create more rationalizations to explain why you're behaving this way. And then that cycle continues. Can you hint at specifically how to deal with trauma-associated sensory distortion? Philip, can you be a little bit more specific about what you mean by sensory distortion? Go ahead.
Sure, like the auditory stuff where you're hearing in ranges that are meant to indicate, like, for instance, the high and low frequencies are warning signs physiologically. Like anything at an extreme frequency to us is outside our norm anyway. Deep rumbles, things. So like that's very much an awareness, like a primitive survival level proprioception. Where am I and what big is moving around me, what important? And then you lose the voices. So when that's causing trouble in your daily life, which I run into with just a TV on trying to talk to one person, and I can't separate the voices anymore. They're all just part of the noise. And it's more about the tone and not about the specifics, which is that broad level of having to be aware of all the sounds and all the locations, when in fact I'm talking to one person and it's my house. So like, you know what I mean? I don't need to be aware of everything, do I? Just the one person I'm talking to is technically. So that's what I run into sometimes, where I think it comes out of that extreme,
Yes.
almost pointless need to be aware.
So on the physiological level, it's all about survival. And so your body adjusts everything in order to optimize your survival. And so needless to say, in the world that we perhaps used to live in, being aware of predators would be one that would naturally be a better use of your ears, right? If you live in a world where threat is constant. I think what you're talking about to a degree outside of that physiological change is your change in your relationship to the mango, right? So no longer does whatever that is, whatever your mango is, no longer is it just a mango. No longer does it provide you with pleasure. It now is a source of fear and danger. And when your nervous system is in this constant heightened state of arousal, everything becomes that potential to be fear and danger. And so you do whatever you can to go in, right? To remove yourself from these dangers. Is that sort of touching on what you're talking about? I mean, in terms of other sensory distortions, right? The world is a
Yeah.
subjective experience. So when you look at something, whether or not that is a beautiful wall, or the color is pretty, or the color is ugly, or whatever, it doesn't really exist outside of your relationship to it. And so with trauma, like suddenly that wall is now a fearful thing. Suddenly, what's behind the wall? I want to know what's in that wall. And you can see it manifesting in lots of different ways. Like, well, what's that wall made of? Are the chemicals in it dangerous? Are they poisonous? Like, what should I be standing in this room? And it goes on and on and on, right? That cycle becomes really deep and really, you get stuck on that rut. So that really kind of beautifully leads me into, did anyone else have any questions about how you start to restrict your life and how we get into a cycle of restriction and then rationalization? Beautiful. Okay, cool. The last thing, of course, is how do we break this cycle? And if I had that answer to you, I would be a far more well-adjusted human being. I would probably have some degrees behind me on the wall, a few doctorates, and a couple of lifetime achievement awards. Because the real truth about this is that this is a process and it's individual. But I'll share some of the things that have worked in my own life that I continue to process and I continue to work with. And it's going to sound a little cliche because of the nature of our organization, but the things that I found most useful to myself are yoga, meditation, and karma yoga. And I think that the reason that they are so pronounced in their effects is that trauma keeps you in the past. It keeps you living in the past. It keeps you affecting your future out of the fear of the past. And so the more time you are able to experience fully absorbed in the present moment, the more you are able to begin to expand that window of tolerance and begin to change your relationship with the mango. I'll use downward dog for myself. When I first did downward dog, I thought it was one of the most uncomfortable positions I had ever been in. And then my wife told me it was a resting pose. And I just laughed because, like, how could anyone rest when my hamstrings are burning? And then that pain became sort of a discomfort over time, that I was aware of the way my hamstrings felt, but I didn't react as strongly to it. And then over time, my relationship with that discomfort moved to something that sort of felt almost like accomplishment. I could feel myself stretching. I could feel myself growing and changing. And now downward dog is a resting pose. It's one of my favorite places to go and just sort of reconnect and reboot. And so yoga, and I'm not speaking of asana, is something that allows us, of course, just to connect with the here and now and change our relationship with ourselves, the mango inside, and then, of course, the mango that's out there. John, I see you have your hand raised. Did you have a question, bud?
Sorry about that.
No, don't be.
Just I have my son with me, so I apologize for the noise.
I love all the kids and the dogs and the partners walking in the back. It's all good. I love it all.
See you later. I was going to ask about how we recognize that response you were talking about in other people. So if somebody, say, shutting down, and you maybe just met them, how do I, there could be a million things going on, but how do I recognize that? That was my question.
Sure. So as somebody who has experienced plenty of constriction in my own life, the shutdown, you see it like this. The slumped shoulders. How you doing? Fine. Fine is like, that's a 4-letter word to me. Fine. Fine. And the way that you are able to affect that person is to not let your nervous system start to react, to sort of override your own natural instinct to be like, something's wrong. Be cool, something's wrong. Is to actually try to affect their nervous system by increasing the prosody of your voice, by offering gestures like smiles, smiling through the eyes, eye contact. Many people who've experienced trauma don't want to look people in the eye. I noticed this in myself. I never wanted to look people in the eye. And since we have phones now, it's kind of really easy. Oh, yeah, none of this. But then I started noticing it in my son, that my son didn't make eye contact with people. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. So I made a conscious effort to make eye contact. And really within weeks, he was making eye contact with everybody. And it was no issue. So the way you can sort of recognize that is some of the things I talked about before: the flat face, the monotone voice, the sort of one word monosyllabic answers. And then you override that by tuning into your own nervous system, knowing what's going on in yourself, and conveying to them, like, you're totally safe. And not only are you safe, I'm enjoying being with you. Because we cannot help as tribal members to not react to what the other monkeys are doing, right? And so if all the other monkeys are saying to me, like, no, 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 you're welcome here, I like spending time with you, my nervous system starts changing on fundamental levels that let me know I am safe and I'm someone that these other monkeys want to be around. And what's happening is literally 80% of the information is coming up. You're okay, you're okay, you're okay. So even if up here, I'm still processing every mango as a moment of danger, eventually that nervous system will override, as it's sort of already doing for people who are still dealing with their post-traumatic stress. It's still overriding the conscious awareness that in this present moment, nothing is wrong and I am safe. And so I feel like the more time we spend in that present moment, the more time we are able to start to tune into what is going on in our nervous system and start to not push down, not constrict, not move away from those feelings, but to realize these feelings are happening, but that they're not perhaps in relationship to what's happening now. And then that gives me a little bit of distance, which allows me to start to process what that mango really is. Does that sort of make sense? The other thing I mentioned it a little earlier was to find your others. The reason that it is so important for us at United We Own to have someone who looks like you, sounds like you, and has similar life experiences with you at the front of the room is that you instinctively connect with them. Because they look like you, they sound like you, they are a part of your tribe. And so in your own process, it is so important that you find the others who have experienced this, maybe not your specific trauma, but a trauma. I have several friends that are veterans, and when they are with the other veterans, there is a sense of ease that they don't feel interacting in traditional civilian life, because they know that the people that are in that room with them have a shared knowledge. How do you recommend we continue to deal with our own trauma while attempting to help others with theirs? That is a profound question, Stacy. I believe that it all begins with you. And the more that you are able to do your own work, the more you will be of service to the others who you are attempting to help. And I think that a lot of that in terms of help is like, you really can't ever help anybody, right? We call that it's like a 4-letter word here at United We Own, because you cannot help anybody, but what you can do is to reflect to them that they are loved, there is value. People want to be seen with value, they want to be heard with value, and they want to be touched with value. I believe it was Susan who said Jafar is her teacher. He's one of mine as well, and that's one of his things he says all the time. It's a really deep, true, profound thing. So, Stacy, I would say that in terms of helping others, it's the best way is to do that work yourself. And the more you do that work, the more people will see that. I mean, who do you connect with, right? The people you want to emulate, the people you want to be. So we're drawn to those people who have done that work on their nervous system because, or their own world, because their whole aura is expressing out to you, yes, 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 and we're drawn to that. So I guess that sounds a little cliche, but doing the work on yourself makes the biggest impact. Sean, can you speak on the shadow side of trauma bonding, seeking people similar? Sure. So this is that back and forth, right? The oscillation in symptoms. And so the finding of the others can become a negative, right? It can go too far in the other direction where it becomes a codependency thing. But again, that comes back to having an awareness of the relationships in your life and sort of how you're involved with them. So the shadow side is that there is a shadow side to all of the potential symptoms that you have and your recovery through those, right? So you can bond with others, and then you can become too needy on their own approval for you to experience those things. And I think a good thing to always go back to is to remember that all relationships, everything that you're experiencing is a subjective thing. And so to pull back and to try to look at it in a subjective way, it's probably not the greatest answer ever, Sean. I hope that's of some value. Philip, can you qualify looks like you, or clarify what that means for the benefit of anyone new? Looks like in which dimensions? I mean, that could be anything. That can be anything from the color of your skin to the life experience you've had to whether or not you are experiencing a specific dis-ease, whatever that is. It doesn't have to be a physical thing, right? It can be just someone who has experienced a similar life. There are many, many colors, shades of human and gender on this call right now, but I feel very connected to many people. I feel especially connected to those who said, I am also a trauma survivor. So when I say looks like you, that's more what I mean, right? Like looks like you in here. The outside, probably no out there anyway. So like the outside, that's what I mean. What if someone looks like you in here? I also noticed that people experience trauma also over apologize. That's a really interesting observation. And I think that makes sense. I think that people who experience trauma often are people pleasers, right? They want to please people because they don't want to experience the negative when you don't please somebody, right? I experience that on myself. My wife is more on akin to that of like, I want to be a people pleaser. I'm more of like, and I would, a list of profanities, go away. I reject you. I don't usually try to please you. If you tell me to do something, I will tell you where to put it. Yes, thank you, John. Very much so. Very profound. So we have just a couple of minutes left. There's one last thing I want to leave you with, and Dr. Wayne Dyer brought it to my attention. And in the service of others, when I commit an act of kindness to someone, that person feels better. And that's a pretty obvious one, right? That person feels better. But what they've shown is that you performing the act of kindness feel far better than the person who received that act of kindness. But what's even cooler is anyone who witnesses that act of kindness feels better. And so that's the cycle that I think we as trauma survivors want to move towards, is this service of others, taking it out of ourselves and putting it on to serving that other person. Because when you serve that other person, you serve yourself. And then the cycle goes from, I'm not good, I'm not worthy, I need to be alone, I need to stay away, to I have value, I'm needed here, people like me, I'm doing good things. And so I believe that that's where the karma yoga comes in, the service to the other without any expectation of what's going to come back. And then my final thought is, take that same service and put it towards yourself. I had great progress for myself and my own trauma when I started thinking of myself as somebody other than myself. So when I tried to help me, well, I wasn't worthy enough. I didn't deserve that kind of love or support or compassion or understanding that I had trauma. And so that's why I'm kind of a strange person. But when I looked at myself as Matt Jared, this entity that existed outside of myself, I found it far easier to be of service to that individual. And when I was of service to that Matt Jared, of course, is me. Don't tell me that. I was able to make deep progress for myself because I started to treat myself like I would want to be treated. So it all kind of comes back to the yoga, right? Which has nothing to do with asana. But the yoga, being here in the moment, being in connection with others, and being of service to those other people. And that's all I got. So does anybody have any questions or anything that they'd like? And I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you very, very much for being here. This was as beneficial for me as I hope it was for you. And I find that each time I take this step forward, I kind of break through a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. Thank you so much, Stacy. Thank you very, very much. It's really wonderful to connect with you. And thank you also, Rachel. So I'm just going to kind of hang out here on the call. If anybody has any questions that they wanted to process outside of the recording, we'll stop the recording, and then that way we can just kind of have a little chat. Otherwise, thank you all so very much for showing up. For anyone who doesn't know, I'll do a brief pitch. We're a by donation, no minimum organization. So all of our offerings are offered in that way. And any donation that you receive goes right to supporting the work that we're doing, which is hiring teachers to go in and work with trauma impacted communities. And we're still doing that right now. We're doing it online. John's teaching classes for us right now. So the work goes to that. It also goes to supporting these workshops. We pay all of our teachers so that this work continues to be out there and available to everybody. And when we say no donation, no minimum, we are passionate about that. We mean that deeply. There are times in life when you just need to receive. And we feel that very deeply, that needs to be part of the offering. We also do have a membership, and that's $9 a month or $108 a year. And you get unlimited access to all the workshops, and you get priority registration and some other cool stuff like magnets and sunglasses and, hip stuff like that. So if anyone has any questions about that. Also we're doing our member drive right now. So you would get 2 bonus months, which is kind of cool. So you get 14 months of unlimited for the 108. So anyway, thank you all very, very much for showing up. It was a real deep pleasure to share this time with you. And I look forward to many more in the future. So thank you.